How was a day during the great Ramon Empire? Before first light, the villa's great gates open. A cold wind sweeps across the courtyard, carrying the smell of damp stone and manure. They are slaves brought from distant lands, stripped of names. At the foot of the master's tower, a line of shackled figures stirs, bound to toil, revealing hollow eyes. Marcus once, a free artisan, ratchets his chained ankles forward. His hands are bruised from yesterday's labor. Under the watchful gaze of the overseer, Marcus digs furrows in clay soil, his tunic stiff with sweat and grime. They assemble in the garden beds. Each stroke of the mattock sends clods of earth flying, his back arching beneath the weight of the iron head. A single lantern swings. Pause. Ambient. Metal links clinking. By torchlight, he meets their eyes for a brief second, then looks away. For a slave, dignity survives only behind bowed head. He pauses only to swallow sour wine, offered in a chipped clay cup. The soil is stubborn, full of stones that tear at bone and sinew. No bread only, the bitter taste of cheap vino to lubricate raw throats. He washes down a handful of barley. Around him, others plant onions and leeks for the master's table. There is no mercy here, only the silent demand of relentless work. Sound, overseer's distant bark, soft grunts of effort. To shoulder 2 heavy amphorae. Each step is a reminder of chains that bind not just his ankles, but his very soul. As the sun edges above the villa rooftops, sweat pours down Marcus's face. The overseer's whistle cuts through the morning air. It is time to haul water from the cistern. Marcus joins the others, shoulders aching. Pause. Ambient. Water sloshing in jars. Labored breathing. At mid-morning, when the villa's ladies emerge to admire the garden's progress, Marcus stands erect, sweat-soaked tunic clinging to his chest. Fade out on distant chatter and rustle of silk. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, its relentless heat bore down upon the fields. Marcus and his fellow slaves emerged from the shadowed shelter of the granaries, their shoulders burdened with heavy amphorae. The procession moved slowly across the open expanse, a line of bent figures trudging towards distant cisterns that shimmered like mirages on the horizon. The air hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth and ripening grain. Sweat beaded on Marcus's brow, trickling down his face and neck as he carefully placed one foot before the other. The weight of the amphora pressed into his flesh, a constant reminder of his servitude. Without warning, a sharp crack split the air. The overseer's lash had found its mark, and a cry of pain echoed across the field. Marcus froze mid-stride, his muscles tensing as he awaited the next command. The overseer's voice rang out, harsh and unyielding, driving the slaves onward with threats and curses. As the morning wore on, Marcus found himself in the midst of the harvest. The golden stalks of grain stretched out before him, an endless sea waiting to be reaped. He gripped the sickle tightly, its worn handle smooth against his calloused palm. With practiced motions, he swung the curved blade, cutting through the stalks with a satisfying whisper. The air filled with flying chaff, dancing on the hot breeze like golden snow. Marcus worked steadily, his movements a rhythmic dance of cut and gather, cut and gather. The sun climbed ever higher, its heat intensifying with each passing hour. In a moment of distraction, Marcus's hand brushed against his tunic. He felt the small lump hidden there, a shard of bread he had managed to secret away earlier. The thought of it made his empty stomach clench with hunger, but he dared not reach for it now. Later, when the overseer's gaze was turned elsewhere, he would savor each precious crumb. As he worked, Marcus found himself alongside Gaius, a fellow slave he had known since childhood. Their eyes met briefly, a silent understanding passing between them. Gaius leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper above the rustle of the grain. "Have you heard? There's talk of a revolt in the northern provinces. They say some slaves have won their freedom." Marcus's heart quickened at the words, hope flaring briefly in his chest. But he quashed it quickly, knowing how dangerous such thoughts could be. He gave a small nod, acknowledging Gaius's words without committing to them. They both knew the price of rebellion, having seen the consequences firsthand. The day stretched on, an endless expanse of toil under the merciless sun. Marcus's world narrowed to the sweep of his sickle, the burn in his muscles, and the constant vigilance required to avoid the overseer's wrath. Time seemed to slow, each moment drawn out like honey from a comb. As the sun began its slow descent towards the western hills, a new sound cut through the air. The overseer's horn echoed across the sun-baked earth, its mournful tone signaling the end of the day's labor. Marcus straightened slowly, his back protesting after hours bent over the grain. He looked out across the fields, taking in the sight of his fellow slaves. They stood like weathered statues, their faces etched with exhaustion and resignation. The day's toil was evident in every line of their bodies, in the slump of their shoulders, and the weariness in their eyes. As they began to make their way back to the slave quarters, Marcus felt the weight of the hidden bread against his chest. It was a small comfort, but one that would have to sustain him through the long night ahead. Tomorrow would bring another day of backbreaking labor under the scorching sun, but for now, there was the promise of rest and the faint hope of a better future. The procession of slaves moved slowly across the darkening fields, their shadows stretching out behind them like long fingers reaching for freedom. The air began to cool, bringing with it the first hints of evening. In the distance, the first stars began to appear, twinkling faintly in the deepening twilight. As they neared the slave quarters, Marcus cast one last glance over his shoulder at the harvested fields. The land stretched out behind him, a patchwork of gold and brown under the fading light. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to walk those fields as a free man, to feel the earth beneath his feet without the weight of chains. But such thoughts were dangerous, and Marcus pushed them aside as he stepped into the shadows of the slave quarters. The day was done, and tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now, there was only the quiet of the evening, the meager comfort of his hidden bread, and the soft murmur of his fellow slaves as they settled in for the night.